Sandi and welcome to Minerva. Today we're going to do a sew along with Sewalong's Blaire Shirt and Dress. We're going to make the dress version, but it also comes in a cute little cropped shirt version. There's lots of great techniques we're going to learn in this dress, and we're going to go step by step through each one of them. And also all the details that you need regarding this to make this project will be in the documents attached to the video, so you're all set there. Now we're going to talk about a couple of really interesting things. We're going to do a two-piece collar, and if you've ever been stressed about a two-piece collar, don't be. This is the time to do it, and we are going to go step by step through each one of the details, and I'm going to show you how to make beautiful collar points. If you've always struggled with them, this is a fail-proof technique, and your collar points will come out beautifully every time. Also, we're going to do this really nice tab front. If you haven't done a shirt dress before, this is a simple technique to do one. And we're going to put on covered buttons. You can't even see the buttons on this dress because they're covered with the fashion fabric, so they look great. Another detail that we have in this dress is these bias sleeve bindings. Genius, absolutely genius. Most of them are cut on the straight of the grain. This one's cut on the bias, so it's beautiful and it feels comfortable. It moves with you when you move. The real highlight of this dress is its pocket. It has a very interesting pocket that hangs down below the shirt dress. So the pocket bag hangs down below the shirt dress, and I'll pop a photo of it right here. You can see how the shirt dress kind of curves around, and then you have that little pocket hanging down. We did it all in the same fashion fabric, but if you wanted to do some color blocking and you changed the collar and the front tab in that pocket, you would have this really nice linear look with your color blocking, and it would be a really fun and different technique. So that's what we're going to explore today. Let's get sewing. All right, let's start sewing. We are ready, and we're going to start with step one. Now, the way the instructions are laid out, step one is the collar and the collar stand, and then it's separated between the shirt and the dress. So we'll start with step one, and then we skip over to, I believe, step 15 is where the dress starts. I'm going to cut two collar pieces, and one of them you are going to back with an interfacing. We use this really nice lightweight interfacing. You just want a little bit of stiffener. You're also going to interface the collar stand, and then the tab, the front tabs that go down to hold the buttons and the buttonholes, and that just gives the fabric a little bit more stiffness. You can see how much body this has. This one's not interfaced and it's softer, so we want our collars and our tabs to kind of stand up a little bit. So when you're ironing this on, there's glue on one side and you can feel it. It's kind of sticky. You don't want to put this right on your ironing pad. You want to put a piece of scrap fabric underneath it. I just keep one by my iron all the time. And then also I put a piece of scrap fabric on top because you don't want this glue stuck to your iron. That is miserable. Absolutely don't want that. And don't use your good press cloth, because you get glue on your good press cloth, again, it's a problem. So you have something underneath it to protect your ironing board cover and something on top to protect your iron. And you want to take your iron and put it down and hold it. Count to 10, lift it up, put it down and hold it. Count to 10, lift it up, put it down, all the way down. You don't want to do this with your iron, because this may move and you can't see it because now it's sandwiched between two pieces of fabric, that you're going to have a hot mess. So besides, you want even pressure. After it's all on, if you want to give it a quick iron, that's fine. So now we have our two collar pieces, and we're going to sandwich them right sides together. And we're going to sew the sides and the outside edge. So I'm just going to pin this. I'm going to pin this end, and obviously we cut them together, so they should fit together perfectly. If they don't, there's a problem with our cutting skills. All right. So I'm going to throw a few pins in here, and then we're going to talk about stitching them. I am a big fan of stitching my corners by stitching off. So I'm going to stitch up this side, and I'm going to stitch all the way off. And then I'm going to stitch all along this large curved edge, and I'm going to stitch off, and then I'm going to stitch this side seam and I'm going to stitch off. We're going to leave this part open down here because that's how we turn it. Also remember, for the collar, the seam allowances are 1/4 of an inch. The rest of the dress is made at 3/8 of an inch, but for the collar it's 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to take this and go stitch it, and then we'll turn it. We have this beautiful collar. I'll show you how to turn it so the points are just like right on. Absolutely gorgeous. All right, my collar is stitched together, and you can see right up in that little corner how I have stitched off, and I have a triangle there. Now you can snip this. If you want to snip a little bit off, that's fine. To take a little bit off of that angle, that will reduce some of the bulk. And if you're not getting a good turn on your collar, you can also go through and clip this outside curve a little bit, because that will give the fabric some place to go. So you can go through and clip that. But what I want to show you is how to turn the corners. So you're going to fold down one side along the seam allowance and fold down the other side along the seam allowance, and you have this beautiful little point already. So then you slide your thumb in between your two pieces of collar. Let me redo that. Slide your thumb in between. There we go. And grab hold of it. So I still have that really pretty point right there, and I'm going to transfer that point to the other side. And it's that simple. And you have this beautiful point. So now you have your collar. You're going to press it open. We're going to press it so that the seam is open and we don't get any rumples, and then we're going to press it very carefully so we have a nice edge along the top. And that's it. That is how you get a perfectly pointed collar. Super simple. So we have a beautiful collar, and now we're going to apply our collar stand. The interfaced piece of the collar stand, you want to fold up 1/4 of an inch and press it. That's going to be the part that we stitch to close up the collar. Now we're going to apply our collar stand, and to do that we want to find the center of the collar stand and the center of our collar. So we fold them in half and put a little pin at the center, and then we match them up. So that is, now we should be balanced. Our collar stand should be balanced because we want this edge, which overhangs the collar, to be even on both sides. So I'm going to pin this in place. And then I want to make sure that it's balanced, so I'm going to match up my collar edges here, and then make sure that my collar stay edges are the same, because that's really important. You want it balanced on either side. So that looks good. And I need to sandwich this collar between the two pieces of banding. So I'm going to go back and put a second row of pins in, and I want to fold this edge down. I want to stitch it that way. I want to stitch it down that way, so when I invert the collar, that edge is there. So I'm going to repin this side, and then I can go back and unpin the other side, because I'm happy the way the other side looks. Now, if this is too much for you to do all at once, you can pin one side and stitch it, right, baste it, and then go back and apply the second piece of the collar stand, because you need both pieces to sandwich this collar and finish off the edge. Essentially what we're doing is finishing off the edge of the collar and giving it a little structure. I'm going to take these first set of pins out because I don't need two sets to go through my machine. I don't want to sew over the pins. That's unpleasant. All right, so we have our collar sandwiched in between our collar stands, and we are following along with this diagram here in the instructions, right? So we sewed our collar. Here's our collar stand. We've just applied our collar stand, and now we're going to stitch it. And when we do, we're going to end up with a collar that looks like this. Now on this one, it appears that they have top stitched it. I haven't top stitched mine. You certainly can go ahead and top stitch your collar. That is a look. If that appeals to you, feel free to do so. I'm going to leave mine plain. I like the way it looks. And that's a personal choice. It's just about style. So I'm going to go stitch this and I'll be back. And here we have our collar stand all stitched together. One of the things that we want to do, because we have this curve here, is we want to put a few clips, you know, every inch and a half or so, and to the seam, but not through the seam, obviously. What this does is it helps release the fabric because we're working with a curve. So it gives the fabric somewhere to go. So when we turn this down, look at how beautiful that looks. And we turn this little puppy around here. We'll give this a press. We have this beautiful collar. How gorgeous is that, right? So again, before we proceed, we just want to make sure that we're really happy with the edges, that they line up, and once they're pressed, they'll be perfect, that they line up beautifully. So we're going to press this all this way, and then you have this fold here, which will finish off this edge because this section will get sewn to your shirt top. Okay, so the collar is done. We're going to set it aside and move on to the next part of our construction. This isn't hard, but a lot of people shy away from collars because they seem so daunting, and they're really not. Just a few simple techniques and you've got it made. All right, that was step one. Okay, we're going to make the dress, and we are going, so that means we're going to start at number 15 in the instructions as I look down the list. And what we want to do is we want to stitch the front to the back at the shoulder seams. So here is my back piece. Here's my neck edge, shoulder seams. And there's a little slopey shoulder going on because this is kind of, it has a modified grown on shoulder, I would say, with a really nice little tab on it. And then I want to lay my pieces out the way they're going to look when I'm finished with them. This is really important. So I know that I'm sewing my pieces together all the right way. Here's my neckline, there's my armholes are out here on the side. So these shoulder seams are the ones I want to sew together. So it makes it very easy. I just flip it over and pin it. And I like to pin one edge and pin the other edge. And this one hails over just a smidge, right? So now we're back to 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, right, because the collar was all 1/4 of an inch. And then I'm going to pin this one. So when you pin these neck edges, you have this little hangover piece, right? You can see the right side of the fabric slipping over that because when I open it up again, it'll give me a straight seam. So I'm going to go stitch these at 3/8 of an inch. And we'll be back. Alrighty. I want to spend a minute talking about these shoulder seams and this neck edge. How pretty is that, right? Gosh, this fabric is gorgeous. All right, these shoulder seams have a little bit of a curve, and we want to press them with that curve in it. So when you're pressing something, the first thing you want to do is press it the way you sewed it, right? And then this is a pressing ham. Your grandmother probably had one. You're going to press these seams. If you try to press this shoulder seam flat, you see how it has some shape in it? You're going to get, it's not going to get a beautiful press. You're going to get a rumply. And pressing as you go when you're sewing is one of the best ways to get a beautiful garment and a high-end finish because all the seams are perfect in where they're supposed to be. When you put the ham underneath here, you get just enough of a curve that you can press this and you get this beautiful rounded shoulder seam, right? It's gorgeous. It's pressed really well. So I want you to consider that. That's a pressing ham. And then, you know, all of the information on the things that we talk about will be in the accompanying documents, so you don't need to worry about taking copious notes. Just download that. The other piece of advice I'd like to give you is to stay stitch this neck edge, and essentially it's a single row of stitching with inside the seam allowance. So this is at about 1/8 of an inch. And what that does is it protects this from stretching out. You know, we have to put that collar on here, and if this stretches out, because if you're like me, I've already put this on and looked in the mirror and was like, oh yeah, that color looks great on me, right? Every time you put this on, take it off, move it around, do something to it, this stretches this out. This is cut on a curve, so there's bias all throughout here. And all this stay stitching does is just stabilize this piece, so it helps keep it in its shape. So it stays the same size, which is the size that the collar needs to fit on. If this stretches out of shape, your collar is going to look like this, and it's not going to be pretty, and you're going to be very unhappy with your garment. So that's my soapbox for today about neck edges. So this piece is finished, and we are on to step 16. Now that we have sewn and pressed our shoulder seams, we're going to do our side seams. And they're pretty short. They're these little tiny seams here on the edge. Just pin them and stitch them. Nothing fancy there. And we will have, and then of course you're going to try it on again, right? Because now it'll stay closed and you won't have to hold it. This fabric presses beautifully. It's not slippery. It's a real joy to sew. All right, so we're going to sew our little side seams, and we'll have something that is starting to resemble a top. Here we go. Look at that. Here's our top. Did you try it on again? Yes, of course you did. It's gorgeous. All right, so we're getting ready to put our armbands on, and honestly, I love the concept of these armbands, and I love the way they're cut, but I do have a simpler way to attach them. So here is the armband piece, and it's cut on the bias, which is fabulous because usually if you make armbands, they're cut on the straight of the grain and they don't stretch. And you know, we move our arms all the time. So having these cut on the bias is genius because they're stretchy, which is really nice. So you're going to stitch this edge together. All right, so you have a circle. You have this little circle. And then the way they want you to sew the armband on is to attach one edge of the armband all the way around your sleeve opening. So you would, and you can certainly use this method, but there's an easier way. So they want you to overlay this armband onto the sleeve like so. Let's see, let's get it there so you can see what it looks like. Right, you would match up the edge of the underarm and then match it up all the way around. So there's suggestion. It's stretchy, which is the beauty of being cut on the bias, right? Fiddly. Okay. Their suggestion is that you take this armband and you stitch it to the armhole opening all the way around, and then turn it inside and stitch in the ditch to close up the armband. Well, we don't need to do that extra bit of work. If you take the armband after you've sewn it into a circle and fold it wrong sides together, matching up the edges here. Throw a few pins in here just so I know I have both sides matched up together. This is going to save you a little time, and it will look a little more high-end. All right, so now I have my armband, and it's actually a finished band, right? I'm going to apply it essentially in the same manner, but now I'm going to just apply both layers at the same time. So we're going to line up that underarm seam because that's a critical seam, and then we're just going to apply it all the way around our armhole. And stitch it, right? Think about that. instead of having to go back and stitch it again and stitch in the ditch. And honestly, you have to be a really spot on seamstress to get that stitch in the ditch and not have some kind of ugly ruffle thing going on the inside, because it's a challenging task. It can be done, but why should we challenge ourselves? Sewing is supposed to be enjoyable, right? We're supposed to have fun. So now I have pinned that armband all the way around my sleeve opening, and I'm going to stitch it. And after I stitch it, when I open it up, it's already finished. It's all done. I don't have to do another row of stitching. It's going to stay in place. It's finished. It's fabulous. Pick one method. Whichever method you choose, you certainly can follow along with the pattern and do a second row of stitching. This is faster, it's neater, and it looks a little nicer, I think, in my opinion. All right, armhole bands. Look at that beautiful armband. Isn't that a thing of beauty? Right, yes, you're gonna try it on again. So this is why we stitch the neck edge, right? Look at how gorgeous that is. And it went on very simply. We stitched it on as a unit and then just pressed it. And again, this is where your pressing ham comes in handy, because you can slide this on here and get a really nice press on these rounded seams. And doesn't that look gorgeous? So our shoulder seam looks beautiful and our armband looks beautiful. All right, here are our side seams. Here are our lower pieces for the garment, and you can see they have this notch here, right, for the pocket. There's a little notch. The pattern piece goes out and comes back in again. And the first thing we want to do is we want to neaten up this edge. So you can turn it, you can put a zigzag in it, or you can serge it. And it's on both pieces. This is for the pocket. This is where the pocket, your hand is actually going to go through the pattern here at the pocket. So we want to finish these off in some way, shape, or form, just to make sure that they're nice and neat. So I am going to serge mine. You certainly could use a step zigzag or a zigzag stitch, or even turn it over. Alrighty, we want to finish off the edge of our pocket, that little notch, right? So I serged mine. I just hit it with the serger, the overlocker, and then I turned it back and I gave it a super little skinny stitch there, just so it's neat, because this is where your hand is going in. You don't want this rolling out on you. That won't be very pretty. Then the next thing we need to do is we need to mark where we need to stop stitching. So on these front pieces and back lower dress pieces, there's a stitch to here mark. And we want to make sure that we know that we're going to stop there. I'm going to lay my pattern piece on top of my fabric, on top of my pattern piece, and just put a pin in here so I know that that's where I want to stop. I'm going to do it to both front pieces. I'm doing it on the front because the front is actually a little shorter than the back, and so we want to make sure we stop in the right spot. And I'm just going to pin mark both of my pieces. I mean, you could use a chalk mark if that's more your flavor. Just pins are fine for me. Now I'm going to lay my back piece out. This is the finished pocket, and then I am going to take the one that's finished, and I'm going to pin these together. Now the back of this dress is a smidge longer than the front. That's why we pinned the front piece for the stopping mark. So I'm going to pin it up here at the top, and I'm going to stitch down to where I have finished my pockets. And then I'm going to pick up stitching again at the base of where I finished my pocket, and I'm going to stitch down to that mark that says stop stitching here. And one of the things that I do that helps me visually when I need to stop stitching is I put 2 pins in side by side. So now I know that I have to stop stitching there. It's a mental visual cue for me. I'm going to take this and stitch from the top. to the top of the pocket, and then leave this open because remember this is where our hand is going, and then stitch all the way down to the bottom. All right, our side seams are finished. So we stitched from the top to the top of the pocket, from the bottom of the pocket down, and I went past the opening just a smidge because you want to encase all of those raw edges. And then when you press it, you get to press this pocket back, right? So you have an opening, and that's where your hand goes in. So these seams have to be pressed open, and then you can press this pocket so it, like there was a seam there, you could pretend, and that's how it's going to lie flat. When you look at it from this side, you have this absolutely beautifully constructed pocket opening. You don't even see it. It's like it's an invisible pocket, right? So now we're going to tackle our pockets. That's the next step. Let's pull it out and take a look at it. It hangs down below the edge of the dress, which is really kind of interesting, especially if you use a contrasting fabric. In this case, we're using the same, but the dress has like a pickup hem, right? It has a little curved hem, and then this pocket hangs down below it just a smidge. So the most important mark on this pocket is this fold line here, and we want to make sure that we've marked that on our pieces. I use pin marks, but certainly feel free to use chalk. I would avoid cutting into the edge of the fabric. I don't think that that's a really good idea. Typically, it just creates a structural problem, so I would prefer not to do that. So I put a pin on one side, and then I'm just going to duplicate that on the other piece because we have two pockets. And then I'm going to take this to the iron, and I'm going to iron this fold in. All right, so the first thing you want to do for the pockets after we've marked them is you want to finish this edge. So whether you overlock it or turn it under 1/4 inch and top stitch it, that's totally up to you, but we want this edge finished. It's the inside of the pocket. All right, I finished the edge of my pocket. I did a quick little overlock on it, and now I'm going to fold it at those pin marks or chalk marks or whatever you use, and we're going to stitch this just along the side seams, right sides together. We're going to do this for both pockets. Take these marking pins out now. So it looks like this. Right, we have the pointy edge up here. This long flat edge has been finished. We fold it in on ourselves on this fold line mark here that's on our pocket, this fold line mark. Right sides together, and we're going to run stitching up either side of here. We're going to do that for both pockets. All right, we've sewn these two side seams of our pocket, and we've left 3/8 of an inch up here opening at the top. And I would back tack here just to make sure that it doesn't come apart. And then we're going to turn it right side out, poke out those little corners. These are easy to poke out because they're just folds. And what happens is because you have a seam there, this edge rolls in. Isn't that great? That's perfect. So then you can press it. You can take it, press this edge down, and you're going to press this all the way around. So that is the back side of your pocket. Looks great, doesn't it? We are going to apply our pocket right now. So I have my side seam with my little pocket opening here, and my pocket is all ready to go. And I've done a couple of things. I've found the center of the bottom of my pocket, and then also on my dress I have marked where the top of the pocket, that point that we stitched, should start. So you can see on here there's several lines depending on what size you made. You want to mark that pocket. Now there's a couple of ways to put this pocket on. You can chalk mark the front and stitch it from the front side, but if your bobbin thread and your upper thread have the same look. They look the same. There's no, the tension's perfect and everything is going the way it's supposed to be. There's really no reason not to sew it from this side, which is what I'm going to do because it's just a little bit easier to see what I'm doing, right? So I'm going to line up that point that we've folded down with where I'm supposed to have the top of my pocket. And then I'm going to, because it needs to be on a nice flat surface and it needs to be ironed and wrinkle free, and then I'm going to pin this pocket down. And I want to make sure that the bottom, scooch this up so you can see it, that this bottom pin is along the center line, my center side seam, because we want the pocket to be centered, correct? Yes. So everything is nice and flat, and then I am going to stitch. You can see how stitching from this side would be so much easier, right? I'm going to stitch this down. Now, on the pocket directions, it has you stitching to this A mark here, which is right across the top edge of your pocket. Honestly, that doesn't leave you any space to put your hands. You have this pretty pocket and now you can't use it. So I'm going to stitch this so I can actually use the pocket. I'm going to stitch it down about 4 inches on either side. And that gives me a little more pocket room for my hands. So I'm going to stitch it 4 inches down from this piece. So I'm going to stitch from the top point down here all the way down and then back up to the other side. And when you have a beautiful thread like this one that matches perfectly, the stitching is more of a design element. For this, in this case, it's functional because it's sewing the pocket on. So what it's going to look like from the other side now is we have this really pretty opening and we have the pocket fabric matches on the inside. And if we stitch down to here, I actually have room to put my hand in the pocket, and the pocket is functional, which is something that we really kind of like. You can stitch it from this side. Again, if you chalk it out, you can stitch it from this side, but the chances of you missing something underneath and not getting it quite right and being frustrated is a problem, so we want to avoid that. So that's why I would stitch my pocket from this side. All right, we stitched down our pocket. You can see it's all stitched down, and this, using this as a guide, made a really nice edge. And there is our pocket all stitched down. So you have this really nice little pocket, and it's a little deeper. I mean, can you imagine if you stitched it up here, there really wouldn't be much of a pocket. So I did stitch mine a little bit lower than what they recommended on the pattern, but you have this beautiful finished place for your hands, and that's covered in the back, so that's really nice. And then this great top stitching that goes all the way around. And because the thread matches perfectly, it looks beautiful. We used our pocket as a gauge. It's perfect. And you can see down here that we have this little patch hanging down at the bottom, and once we hem our skirt, it'll be peeking through, which is kind of cute. It's a little different. All right, so we are going to start putting everything together. So we have all of our pieces. Now we're going to construct them and put them together. So we're going to sew the top to the bottom, which is pretty simple. We have our top, and we're going to match up the side seams and the edges, pin it, and stitch it all the way around. And again, you're going to try it on, right? Because you're going to want to see what it looks like. So aren't we glad that we stay stitched that collar? Because we want to make sure that it doesn't stretch out. So that neckline, we stay stitched the neckline. Line up your side seams. That's really important. Those are critical because when you look down the side of your dress, you want that all to line up. And you know, these pieces are well drafted. They fit together really well, which is an important consideration when you're making a pattern. You want to make sure the pieces fit together. When they don't fit together, it becomes a big issue. So I'm just matching up my side seams. I have this back seam to do. And again, all the pieces, because the pattern is so well drafted, all the pieces just like fit together like butter, right? You know, that's really, or there's nothing worse than when you go to put a pattern together and the pieces don't fit. So I'm always happy when I get a pattern where everything is well drafted. So we are going to have something that actually looks like a Blaire dress once we sew this seam together. All right, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to the machine and I'm going to stitch my top to my bottom, and then I don't know about you, but I am definitely going to try mine on to see how it looks this time. Okay, did you try it on? It's gorgeous, isn't it? Right? What a cute little dress. So we're going to apply the tab that goes down the front so we can apply our buttons and buttonholes. On one end of this, there is a V. You can see that V there. Let me do it this way. There we go. You can see that V there. That goes towards the top. And I've pressed mine wrong sides together just to give me a gauge to make sure that it's balanced and equal. I don't want it to be flopping around and not be the same. I mean, you need it to be the same all the way down. That's really critical. So I'm going to pin this down the front and stitch it. Right sides together, all the way down to the edge. That is the very first step. So we'll get it attached to our dress. We're going to do that now. Okie dokie. Here is my neck edge, and here is my front tab, and I've stitched it on all the way down. And then I've neatened up the inside because I don't want a lot of bulk in there, and also the edge because I want that to be pretty. And then you want to press, you want to make sure you give it a really good press, and you press the seam allowances towards this button stand. All right? Everything needs to get pressed that way, because this is what we're going to end up with. And now you can see why we did that crease in the beginning, because it gives us the opportunity to get something that's even, which is really key when you're working with this type of a piece. It's right down the center of your garment. So in order to turn it, we are going to sew across the bottom. So you take, here's my piece that I just stitched on, and I'm going to turn it on itself, right sides together, matching up the edges. I have that nice little crease. And I'm going to stitch across there like this. So I've stitched across just that little tab, and then I can turn it in on itself. And don't worry, this is going to, the hem of your garment's going to turn up, and that's what we want, because we're going to actually go back and hem this, but now this front edge is all taken care of for you. And since we pressed it already, it should fall pretty much into place the way we want it. All right, I'm going to throw a few pins in there. So I've pressed my seam allowances in. So this has some structure to it because we have the interfacing in there. We have several layers of fabric. We need something that's going to hold onto our buttons and hold onto our buttonholes. One of the things that you want to do is take your ruler and run it down the length of this to make sure. So mine is 7/8 of an inch, and I'm going to check it in a couple of places, 7/8 of an inch, 7/8 of an inch, because we want to make sure that it's the same. You don't want this part to be really wide and then this part to be really narrow. That wouldn't look very good. And then also, because of that notch at the top, this extends the neckline really nicely, right? Here's the shoulder seam, and this extends the neckline really nice. Now, a couple of options for finishing. They recommend that you stitch in the ditch, which is stitching in this seam that you've just sewn. That's tricky. I think that's hard to do. So you can turn it over and stitch it by hand. That's easy enough, right? You fold this little edge and stitch it by hand to the seam allowance that's in there. That you can do. That's one option. The other option is you can top stitch the outside, both ends, this side and this side. You can top stitch it with your machine and that will hold it into place. My problem with doing either any kind of stitching here is that you're not going to wear this buttoned up all the time, right? This is going to be open. So this on the inside needs to be pretty, because think about it, your blouse opens up. So I am going to turn my overlocking stitch under, and I'm going to hand stitch that down. All right, don't scream at me. You don't have to. You can top stitch it if you want. But I still think even if you top stitch it, you should turn this edge down, because as the shirt opens, this looks a lot better than this, or even a ratty edge, right? So this is my option, but I've given you 3 options. You can stitch it flat like this, just stitch it right in the ditch here, and you need to leave it flat if you're going to do that, because there needs to be enough fabric over here to catch it. Or you can fold this under and top stitch it on both sides. I wouldn't just top stitch it on one side, I would top stitch it on both sides. That makes a big difference. So those are your options for finishing this front tab. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about hand sewing. I stitched this side, one side already. It took me 15 minutes. So that isn't a long time to hand sew. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to hold it together. But look at how nice that looks on the inside, right? So much better than stuff waffling around. So since we put that crease in right at the beginning, it makes it very easy to fold. And I just pinned down this edge that I had. I pinned it down so I can see the edge of my stitching. And after I pinned it all, I went back and I made sure that this was even, that this tab was even all the way across. And now I'm going to sew it down. So I've threaded my needle with a piece of thread that's about 15 to 18 inches long, and I'm just going to put a little knot in the bottom. I'm going to take it and wrap it around my finger and loosen it just a tad, and then stick this tail end in there. I like to do it twice. I like to wrap the tail end in twice. Okay, gives me a little bit better knot. And then pull it. So I have just a little knot, single thread, and I'm going to start down at this bottom end. Because I'm left-handed, you would, one side you have to start on one end, and one side you have to start on the other end. Down at this tail end here where I have this fold, I'm going to leave that. I'm not going to futz with that and go until I do my hem. And when I top stitch all of that, I'll be top stitching through it. So I'm going to start a little bit above that, and I'm just going to come in from the back with my needle because I have that knot and I don't want the tail flopping around, so I don't want to see it. And it's just little stitches, right? A little stitch inside the seam allowance, so because you don't want to see it on this side, so that's why we stitch it to the seam allowance. A little stitch in the seam allowance, a little stitch in the tab. And we kind of take our pins out as we go. Little stitch in the seam allowance, little stitch in the tab. And once you get motoring along and you get the feel for it, you can do both of them at the same time. So I'm going to do a little stitch in the seam allowance and come up through the tab. So it goes pretty quickly, right up through the tab. Just nip it. So you can barely see those stitches, and it's on the inside, so no one really cares. But if the wind blows the bottom open, you have this really nicely finished tab, and if you unbutton the top button, then again you have this nicely finished tab. So I'm going to go all the way down to the other end, and when we get there I'll show you how to finish it. All right, we're getting close to the end of this piece of thread. you don't want like a humongously long piece of thread. You'll be wrangling it the whole time. So it's easier to just use 2 or 3 pieces of thread, whatever you're comfortable with. So this is about as long as I want to get because I'm going to start pulling my needle out of the thread. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle this time and double loop it through the thread. And if I hold my finger down on that knot and pull, my knot is way down here at the bottom. And then I can just take a last stitch and give it a little tug, and that sinks that knot, and the thread is invisible. You can't see where I ended it, so I don't have any tails hanging out. And that's it. Hand stitching is not rocket science. It's not that hard. It just takes a little practice, and you need to just try it and move forward. And I think that once you do, you'll be very happy with the way some of your finishing techniques come out. All right, so let me finish this up, and then we're going to put the collar on. All right, we have our hand sewing all done. Our tabs are finished. So now we're going to put our collar on. And just like when we made the collar, we want to start with the center. So we're going to fold the collar in half and find the center of the collar stand. And then same thing with our dress. We're going to find the center back of the dress. So you can line up shoulder seams and just find the center there. Whoopsie. And there it goes. Now we want to match up our center seams. So right sides together, we're going to have this part of the collar stand where we folded this down out of the way. And the center of this interfaced part is going to go to the center of the back of the neck edge. All right, so that's our starting point. And then we want to go to the edge of our tab and apply our collar stand. Now it's a tight fit. All right, so we're going to pin on the collar stand side. That way the feed dogs will help us ease in the neckline a little bit, because the neckline is a little bit bigger than the collar stand. So we're going to need a little assistance getting these two together, just a little bit. And remember, this is a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance that we're going to sew now. So you might have to play with it and put a few pins in it to get it to line up correctly, because we certainly don't want any rumples in there. That would be sad. And then we're going to go to the other edge, our other tab, collar tab, front tab to the dress, and add in, pin on our collar stand, and then kind of work our way around so these pieces fit together. Make sure we don't get any wrinkles down at the bottom. And since we stay stitched our collar stand, since we stay stitched our neck edge, it hasn't stretched out of shape, so we'll be able to get a good collar in there. You know, and if it's super big, if the neck edge is super big and you're really struggling to get the collar stand to fit, just take in the shoulder seams a smidge, just do them both the same. So see, I have a little extra here that's going to be a little bit much. If you have something that's a little too big, just take in those shoulder seams just a smidge. All right, I went back and graded in my collar just a little tiny bit because it was just too big and the neck edge was going to be much bigger than the collar. So you can see the original white stitching here, and then this stitching, and I just graded it. I started right at my white stitching, about 3 inches in, and just took in a 1/4 of an inch. So it's 1/8 of an inch on this side and 1/8 of an inch on that side. And now this fits beautifully, and I don't have to worry about having any rumples and wrinkles. So now we're going to sew this, and it needs to be 1/4 of an inch. You want to go slow. It's a curve. It's like driving. Because we don't want to get any rumples along the way, and we don't want to catch anything else in there that isn't supposed to be in there. All right. And you can see I have my shirt down and my collar stand up, and that will help me get a nice smooth stitch. You can see I keep stopping and moving everything out of the way. I don't want to have to do this again, right? Once is enough. So I want to make sure that it's all flat and good underneath here before I hit the gas pedal on my machine. I mean, we're sewing a lot of pieces together. Take your time. All right, let's see how we did. Ooh, looks pretty good. So I'm going to turn this around. Look at that, huh? Doesn't that look great? All the way around. I don't see any bumps, no bruises. Excellent. I'm happy with that. So we'll give that a good press. And we want to press this seam again up into the collar stand, and then we have this nice folded edge, and guess what? You're going to have to hand stitch that down, because once again you're going to see that when your shirt tab opens up, right? If your shirt is open, so we need to futz with these pieces at the edge here. They can be a little, they need a little coercion to get inside, but we want to make sure that we take all of this raw edge and cover it up with that folded piece of the collar stand and stitch that down, because you're going to see that when your blouse is open, right? So that's important. So I'm going to press this, and I'm going to pin and hand stitch my collar tab down. All right, we have a collar. How gorgeous does that look, right? And I want to talk to you about training your collar. Whether you are taking a break now or you take one later, you want to set this up to hang out at least overnight. So I want that collar, because it's kind of floppy right at the moment, right? I want the collar to come down to the collar stand. So I'm just going to put a little pin here to hold it in place on either end. We're going to kind of train it so it's not flopping around. And I'm going to take our ham again, our trusty ham, and we're going to wrap the collar around the ham like it's our neck edge. Okay? So we're essentially going to dress the ham, or address the ham, and pin this. You can pin it right into the ham. It'll stay in place. All right, and then I'm going to steam it. I'm going to steam it, spray it with water and hit it with the iron, or hit it with a steamer and leave it and let it dry for a good 2 or 3 hours. Anyway, I like to do mine, like that's the last thing I do before I leave my sewing room. I steam it, and then I don't deal with it until the next morning. Now you do want to take these sliding pins out, because they'll leave holes if you steam it. They'll leave marks. So we're just going to have these pins going in the front to hold it in place. We'll take this one out in the back, and we're going to steam it all the way around and then kind of prop it up in our sewing room and let it train. So then when we take it out, we have this beautiful collar. When we go back the next day, this collar has actually stayed in place. It knows where it's supposed to be. It's all trained. It's ready to go. Right? Super, super simple. We are going to hem this puppy now. And we have these, this pocket bag goes out of the way. We don't do anything with that. That hangs there now. That's really pretty, and it just hangs there. And I believe they want us to do a double fold hem. Let's see. Hem your shirt tails. It says hem your shirt tails. So you don't want to just hem them this way because that will leave this raw edge. So you either want to serge them all the way around and turn them once, or do a very narrow double hem, right? A super narrow double hem, which I think is what I'm going to do. If you have a hemming foot or a roll edge foot or an edger foot, you can do one hem, right? One roll and stitch it and then go back and do a second one. So you'll have this teeny tiny edge. But what you're going to do here at these splits is you're going to kind of blend it in, right? You're going to blend it in as you get up here because you can't keep rolling all the way up. At one point you have to stop. So you're just going to kind of blend it. But as this is stitched, you're going to blend it into a raw edge because you can't keep going all the way up here, right? And same thing with down here. This is good, but we're going to fold all of this in on this edge here. Okay, and you can top stitch it all the way across when you do the final one. Yep, and then that's the hem. And then we're going to talk about covered buttons and the critical button and where to place the critical button and how to measure out the rest of them based on the button that you have to have. Our dress is really coming along, and the next thing we want to determine is the critical button. Now, all of our critical buttons are in a different place. You want a button that's going to run along the bust line here, because that's where your garments will gap. If they're going to gap, that's where they're going to gap. So that's where we want to make sure that we have a button here. All right, so we're going to have a button up here because, not that we will button it, but we definitely will have one here. So then the split between here and here is where your second button will go. And this is going to be the button that you'll probably button and leave this open, right? So whatever this, the distance from here to your critical button, half of that is where your next button's going to go. So this is like 3 3/4 on this Judy and 3 3/4. So that's right about there. So all of my buttons now will be 3 3/4 all the way down. Or if that's too far apart for you, you could put 2 buttons up here. But this is the button. This is kind of sacrosanct, right? That's the button that you want to keep so your garment isn't, you know, coming apart when you move. So think about that. Now I tried this on myself. My critical button is down here. It's a whole nother inch lower than this Judy. So I'll probably put 2 buttons because that's too big of a gap, right? So I'm going to put a button here and a button here, and then I'll use whatever that distance is to finish off my buttons all the way down to the bottom of my dress. But yeah, looks pretty good, huh? It hasn't been ironed yet really too much. This fabric is just fun and vibrant. It's so wild with the paint strokes going everywhere. I love it. It's a nice change from florals because I'm all about the florals this spring. We have them everywhere. And this is really kind of a nice change of pace. So anyway, critical button, put your dress on, give it a try, and figure out where your critical button. We are going to explore the world of covered buttons. So we have these 11mm self-covered buttons, and on the back there is a section of concentric circles. We're going to cut out the 11mm one. Now you want it just a smidge bigger than this, not too big, but just a smidge bigger. If you cut it right at 11mm, you're not going to be able to get it around the button. It's going to be, you're going to be pulling your hair out. So I'm cutting 2 at a time here. and I'm gonna cut them a smidge, and I mean like maybe a 1/16 of an inch bigger than that circle, just because I think it's just a little too small. So not so much bigger, but just a smidge bigger. And then I have my thread knotted at one end, so I have a single strand of thread with a knot at one end, and I am going to just take little stitches right near the edge of the button, and I want a knot on the end so when I pull it, the thread doesn't pull through. So right around the edge of your little circle. These take a little effort, but they're cute. You know, they match your fabric. Sometimes if you have a floral or something, you can fussy cut them so they actually have a little floral top. All right. So now I have my little circle, and if I pull on it, I get this little granny cap thing going on. And now I need a button, and these have a little shank in the back, a little washer. So you just pop them out, but make sure that you don't lose the shank. You need that. So they just pop apart. So you have like a washer and a little button, and there are grooves down here in this button. I'm going to slide the button into my little granny cap so the button shank is facing up. I'm going to tug on my string so it winds around and forms a cap around this button. So I keep tugging. They're very tiny. I'm sorry, I don't think you can see them very well. And fiddly, very fiddly. See, as I'm tugging on that, it's going around the button, and I want to make sure that the top is nice and smooth. We don't have any pleats or gathers, but on the inside you can see that it's starting to gather. So once I'm happy with the way the top looks, I'm going to pull this thread, and I'm just going to wrap it around and then knot it so it doesn't go anywhere. If you knot it right around the shank, that'd be great. You know, as I'm doing these, I'm thinking hot glue might be the way to go. That's another option. And then I'm taking my screwdriver and just shoving these fabrics down into that little groove. Just gonna get them all down there so we don't have any raw edges popping out anywhere. Take another look at the front, make sure I'm happy with the, whoops, take another look at the front, make sure I'm happy with the way the top of it looks. And then I can cut my thread. Go back, make sure all of these little raw edges are tucked right in there nice and neat. I think they're all put to bed. All right, so the top looks good, the bottom looks good. Right, I'm happy with the way that looks. So this little washer can slide on a little bit. And you can get it on there sort of started. To do some finger gymnastics, but you can get it started. You can take a spool of thread, Goodman's works really well, and just kind of push down on it, and that locks it in place. And now you have a button. So the back is covered and closed, and then the front looks really pretty. Okay, I made all my covered buttons. They look pretty good. They will blend right into the dress, so we love that. And I've also measured my critical button, so I know where that's going to be. I'm going to lay my dress out so I can mark the buttonholes. And I like to make sure that I pin the bottom of the dress because we want it to hang perfectly even, right, when we're finished. So you want to pin those two tabs together so they're flush at the end. That's key. And then line up this tab all the way up to the top. Oh, and look at that, it lines up perfectly. We are amazing, right? We love that. So good. So we're going to pin this, and we're overlapping these tabs. Right. Stick a little pin in there, so that'll keep it together. Now this is where my critical button is going to be. Your button will be wherever it is for you. And then I'm going to measure between this top edge, neck edge, and this button. And then we have to do a little math. So here is my critical button. It needs to go right here, and it's at, from this center of this tab, it's at 9.5. So I want to make it simple on myself. So I'm going to make it 9 3/4 because I'm going to put two buttons in between here. So I'm going to have one at 3 1/4 and one at 6 1/2, and then one at 9 3/4. So my buttons are 3 1/4 inches apart. So this one's 3 inches and a quarter, this one's 3 inches and a quarter, this one's 3 inches and a quarter, and I'm just going to keep going all the way down my dress at 3 inches and a quarter, because these are little buttons. 6 1/2, 9 3/4, and then 13, right, and then 16 1/4. Might get one more in there. 16 1/4. So that would be 1 2 3 1 2 3 19 1/2. Right, so each one of these pins represents 3 1/4 inches. And I'm just going to drop my buttons down just because I'm very visual to see if that looks like it's a pretty good spacing. And you know, with these covered buttons, you can't even see them, right? So that looks really good to me. I like the way this is coming out. I mean, they're close enough to give me coverage, far enough apart that they're not on top of each other. Yeah, look at that. That looks great. And then there's going to be obviously one right up here at the neckline, all the way up here at the neckline where you're, let me roll this so you can see it. Right where this neckline is, there's also a buttonhole there. Now, the buttonholes, you're going to follow your sewing machine's manufacturer's instructions for your buttonholes, but you want buttonholes on a shirt to go north to south, right? Because we don't want the shirt gaping. So these buttonholes are going to go north to south, and then this buttonhole across the neckline is going to go horizontally because you want it to be able to move as you move if you move your neck or your throat expands a little bit, you want this to be able to go back and forth, and chances are we're probably not even going to button that one. So you need to take a look at your machine, and I'm going to just put all of these little buttonholes in and hand sew these buttons. They're just a button with a little toggle. The stem has a little hole in it, so there's single buttons. So I'm going to put those in, and our dress is finished. I've made this dress a couple of times now, and I like the style. I like the comfy casualness of it. It's certainly easy to go. You know, you throw it on with a pair of sandals and some earrings, and you are out the door and you're looking great. So it's a good alternative to leggings and a t-shirt. Now, I want you to go ahead and make it. I want you to tag us with hashtag Minerva Makes and hashtag Minerva Makers. And again, all the information in this video will be in the attached documentation, so you can pull that up and take a look and explore all the nooks and crannies of making this really cute Blaire shirt dress. So until next time, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. We love you here at Minerva. I'm Sandi, your Minerva Sew Along teacher. Happy sewing. Bye.